those that were submitted beforehand, and those that we engage today, inshallah, as time allows. But first, I wish to remind you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran al-Kareem, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the experts, people not if you do not know. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the ulama of tafsir have mentioned, He did not expressly make this only about the experts in deen. Rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us interdependent of asking and seeking assistance from one another. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directed our questioning and seeking process that we seek those that are Ahl al-Dhikr in whatever field and area that we are seeking assistance and support in. So subhanAllah, Allah Azza wa Jal did not create any of us complete. So the most powerful and strong and able-bodied person, the day that they are tested by a sickness, they are in need of seeking assistance from one who is qualified in the medical field. But the one with the most degrees on the planet, on the day that they have, an issue in the home or something in their plumbing or something that is outside their expertise, they need a person without those degrees but an expert in that craft. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us interdependent. Most of us, or many of us I should say, do not extend the effort to seeking and questioning and asking in our deen in a directed and consistent and persistent manner the way we do in much of our worldly sciences. And so this is a standard that we are seeking to raise together, inshaAllah, that we apply this same intelligence and the same desire and effort, and even more in our understanding of our deen as we do in our daily lives. The Prophet ﷺ, in a beautiful hadith at the end, he says, إِنَّمَا شِفَاءَ الْعَيِّ السُّؤَالِ. He says the cure for not knowing is to ask and seek. And so this curiosity and this discussion is one of the means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us, inshaAllah, for increasing our knowledge. وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا. Prophet ﷺ was commanded in the Quran to make dua to Allah to increase him in knowledge. And a little tidbit for you, anybody know who the most knowledgeable person among the tabi'een, among the people, the generation after the Sahaba? Anyone know who A'lam al-Tabi'een is with most of the ulama? Tabi'een had many, many great people, of course. Great politicians, great leaders, great people, and had in them the best of the tabi'een. But I'm thinking of the most knowledgeable of them. Anyone know? Certainly, there's a very good argument to be made for Anas ibn Malik. I think you have another. Abu Bakr is in the generation of the Sahaba, but you're right, but we're in the generation after. So many ulama consider the best, certainly the most knowledgeable in hadith among his generation, to be the great scholar Az-Zuhri, and he's in many chains of narration of hadith. And one time somebody is asking some of his fellow students, Bima fatakum az-Zuhri. How did the Zuhri precede all of you in knowledge? He's asking in a nice way. It's like you guys were in the same classroom. You have the same teachers. How come az-Zuhri is in all of these ahadith and you don't have his level of knowledge? And interestingly, it was noted how intent he was in his learning process. Noted that always sitting in front of the teachers, he would be in the front, right? Coming to the front of the classroom and eager. That he would make full effort in learning. That he would revise and discuss. In the narration, it says that he would discuss with his teachers. Then he would discuss with his classmates. And the narrator said that he would not leave the servants of the home or the women of the city or even the young children except that they would discuss with him this lesson. And one of my teachers, he said that you might consider all of knowledge al-munaqasha wal-mudhakara. You might consider that all of knowledge comes from discussion, debate, and study. And so inshallah, this opportunity that we have today to not do a typical conference, right? Sheikh Muhammad, we give this beautiful hour-long lecture, and then we say we have these questions. Oh, we ran out of time. We got one question, but today, alhamdulillah, we have put this time aside together to discuss and debate and learn together, inshallah. So with that, inshallah, we'll turn it over to my dear brother Kashif, inshallah, to start us off with the questions. We do have questions that were submitted ahead of time, and then inshallah, we'll give those precedents and also hear the questions that you have come with today.
Question over here, is it hot? Do I open the windows or and there's the big comfortable. So we're just in one middle, so we're not sitting out there.
One of the big questions was, who created Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
So the first question was a question on who created Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this question actually comes explicitly in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we learn how to deal with questions like this. As we talked about in the seminar, there are, as we said, just in a memorable way to remember, there are not necessarily bad questions, there are bad ways to deal with questions. And so certain questions we pursue, certain questions we stop, and we learn these different tools. The Prophet ﷺ says in the meaning of the hadith that people will continue to question. And in another narration of the hadith, actually the prodding is linked back to the shaitan to push the boundaries of the question. That here, I have come from my parents, and my parents have come from theirs. They continue along that line until they say, Man khalaq Allah. This exact question comes in the hadith. Until they say, who created Allah? Then the Prophet ﷺ says, the answer to this question, how to deal with this question, I say, it says, قُلْ آمَنْتُ بِاللَّهِ. Affirm, I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The ulama call this is a tool of questioning. It's a tool of called tawaqquf. What does tawaqquf sound like to you? Stopping, right? So it comes from stopping at the boundary of a question that is beyond the capacity of our mind to understand in its entirety. So you notice that the Prophet ﷺ says, did not say, let me say that again, did not say that this person has evil in their heart, has a corrupt and twisted mind, right? But he said when this question comes to a person, this is the way to react to it. For those of you studying graduate school or philosophy, this would be called, in our terminology, a supra-rational question, S-U-P-R-A. A question that is beyond rational means to understand. Why is this beyond our intellectual capability to understand? This and other questions about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His form, in His origin, in things that we are used to as human beings. It's a question back at you.
What was the question?
Why is this beyond our rational ability to answer this question? Why is this beyond our minds?
We can't apply the scientific method.
It's true, we can't apply the scientific method. Can you extend that? Okay, so you said we as our human beings are limited by our experience. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not limited by that. What else?
We expect everything to have a beginning. Did we expect everything to be created?
Everything we have directly experienced with has a beginning, a creator, an origin, and an end. We've never experienced something that is unique like this directly in our lives. Anything else? Anybody memorize Surah Al-Ikhlas? It's the last ayah. Allah, it's not a trick question. You can open your mushaf if you want. I don't mind. I'm not judging. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. There is nothing that can be compared to Him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There is nothing like Him. So the ulama extract from these a nice saying. They say, whatever occurs to your mind about Allah, in terms of form and figure in these questions, know that Allah is different than that. Why? Because what's occurring to your mind is things we've experienced in creation. Even stories of fantasy and movies and so on are just modifications the scariest kids' books, the monsters, the imaginary wangdoodles. All of these creatures are just modifications of things we've smelled, touched, experienced, saw. Even our dreams can be linked back to experiences and things we've had. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is entirely unlike His creation. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as He says, وَالْأَوَّلُ وَالْآخِرُ, He is the first and the last, without beginning and without end. The details of how and the origin of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond our mind. Ibn Taymiyyah has a beautiful statement about this. He says, Islam has come with what is beyond the mind, not what is against the mind. This is another way of saying Islam has come with some things that are supra-rational, but not what is irrational, against the foundations of the mind. So again, Ibn Taymiyyah says Islam has come with what is beyond the mind, not what is against the mind. And so we affirm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of the time. He is not bound by time. He is not bound by space. وَعَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. He is the first and last as He is described. But asking a question like this is veering into that area that we have no rational ability to understand. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no origin, He is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unique in that manner. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. Makes sense?
So a question that outlines the whole discussion is, if you have a question that you think would cause doubts in others when asked, is it better to keep it to yourself or to ask?
Bismillah wa salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Inshallah, if I understand the question right, if somebody does have a question, and I just want you to know, inshallah, that not every question is necessarily to be a doubt question. Yani sometimes if someone is really questioning something, it does not mean necessarily that this one is doubting. So this is just a clarification. A lot of us are questioning to increase our level of knowledge and connection, because that's the purpose of our creation. What comes to mind, just to explain this before I would answer the question, is the experience of our beloved Prophet Ibrahim sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show him how does he actually create something back, or create something from without existence. So that question was not in any way that Prophet Ibrahim was in doubt, or that he was delivering a message that he was not really sure about, but rather he questioned something in order to affirm and confirm what he has as a belief. And that's why he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala extremely and politely to show him, and that was part of the question. So just to eliminate that not every question means it's a doubtful question. That's why our Prophet Ibrahim said that he wanted to know how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates something out of nothing. وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّي أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى. That's where Sayyidina Ibrahim told, oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, extremely polite, and I have mentioned this back in the conference, if you remember, that out of politeness, and this is the adab and the etiquettes of a question, and just 10 seconds that I wanted just to build on what Imam Abu Talib just told you. If you notice the hadith that Imam Abu Talib had shared with you about questioning until somebody would come to question Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the existence of Allah. The Sahaba themselves, despite their deep connection with Prophet Muhammad and their absolute firm belief in the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, did not jump into the question immediately. Please don't, I'm not really trying to say that this is our way of how we ask, and this is how the Sahaba said, oh, so it took them almost half an hour to prepare where they're getting at. We would come to question ourselves, who created us, who created this, who created the birds, who created the thing, who created the soul, they're getting at something, but they just can't bluntly, boldly jump into it. Who created Allah? And that is something out of the etiquette, you guys, that we need to learn out of appreciation of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. even if you have the answer absolutely correctly in your mind, you should show everybody the etiquette of how you come close to ask anything that pertains to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if you ask me who created your car or manufactured your car, you can jump into it. But if you come and ask who created Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٍ is not applied in your question. You just made Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the same level of making a car. You asked the exact same format of question. You said who manufactured your car, and you said who created Allah. So you did not even come close to make that classifications and that difference of level, even with the etiquette of questioning. So that really takes us into the answer of the question: do we keep it to ourselves, or do we actually ask? And the answer is absolutely you do ask, like the Sahaba did, like Prophet Ibrahim did, like Prophet Musa alayhi salam did. Remember, the question didn't just come out of nowhere. Even prophets themselves, that Prophet Musa alayhi salam asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, can I see you? But again, with that etiquette. Prophet Ibrahim, Rabbi arini kayfa, oh Allah, Rabbi. Now he's referencing that you are my Lord. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you are in control of everything. And then he would bring his request. Same thing with Prophet Musa alayhi salam. You know, it's the same thing. Rabbi, it's all about, oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator, the one that originated us, the one that has created us. Would I be able to see you? But of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought him that example. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have easily answered back again, like Imam al-Qadr said, don't question this. Who are you to question this, whatever. He actually gave him an experience that gave him some type of imagination that he might actually be able to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he told him, look at the mountain, and as the mountain clears out, you will see me if you're going to be able to see. So he's actually, you know, allowing him to ask. He's actually allowing him to live the experience of what he is requesting. He didn't shut the door on him at all. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have easily shut the door and says, this is beyond your ability to do so. So don't ever come close to ask such thing, but actually trained him to actually be able to question and not to leave it within himself. Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have shut the door at that second, then whatever would come later on to the mind of Prophet Musa or the followers or what have you, they would refrain and they would just keep it to themselves, and that wouldn't help. But he allowed him to live the experience, and as the mountain, you know, cleared out and basically started shaking and whatever, Prophet Musa, what happened? He fainted. He couldn't just, it's really beyond the imagination of what we can take from the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then when he was back, you know, brought back to his consciousness, this is where he realized that he was able to ask, he was able to live the experience. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to be able to come close to imagine or to understand or to comprehend who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with His mercy didn't ask so. He did not ask in any way, you guys. It didn't say that in the Quran. It didn't say this in the Hadith. It didn't say this during the traditions and customs of our beloved Prophet ﷺ, that in order for you to attain Jannah, you have to come to a level where you actually come to comprehend who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. If that was the case, we would have been all doomed. There is no way for us to enter Jannah. But He didn't even come close, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even to ask us to come close to such level, but rather it's just a simple, basic submission, and you can question it the way, inshaAllah ta'ala, you feel comfortable, as long as we do proceed and we do take these etiquettes in mind, so we can show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala our appreciation of who He is, and we appreciate the ni'mah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the intellect that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed us with. Jazakumullah khair.
How can, on this question on seeking knowledge, what's the best ways for Muslim youth to seek knowledge? Perhaps in IAR and other facilities.
On seeking knowledge, I think one big obstacle we have to encourage one another on is many of us or I should say link seeking Islamic knowledge in particular with the overwhelming goals, such as when I travel overseas, then I will learn, my deen. When I'm able to take a whole summer off from work and school, then I'll go to an Arabic-speaking country and learn the language of the Quran al-Kareem. Oh, when I, take a gap year, that's a thing these days, right? This new terminology. When I take a gap year, they hadn't invented that term, Sheikh Muhammad, and I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying, new words. So I take a whole year off, then I'll go study. So a very practical thing that we should encourage one another to do is to be, very, very pragmatic and about our seeking knowledge. In fact, it was the habit of the students of knowledge of the past that they wouldn't even travel to seek knowledge until they had fully exhausted their local resources. And some of us may have life situations where it's not practical to travel, or it's not practical to take a year off, or you have a responsibility to take care of children or family members or elderly parents or anything like that. And so take the bite-sized opportunities, inshallah, to seek knowledge of the deen. Our understanding of the deen should always be founded in the foundational sciences, and that means being centered on Al-Quran al-Kareem. Not just its recitation, but its understanding, connection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's message to you, and the tools for how to understand it. Investment also in the sciences that help you understand the Islamic sciences pay back in big ways. One of these, of course, is Arabic language, because it opens for you the primary source of the Quran al-Kareem without a translator in between, but it also opens for you so much of the tradition. But a big place, especially in universities, where people's gaps are showing, is in the studies of the usul sciences. The usul are the principles by which certain fields of study are governed. So, for example, the usul of fiqh is not how you come to Islamic jurisprudence or legal rulings, but the rules of the game, right? What is a alim? What is an opinion? How does a person engage these texts? In many places of particularly Western academies, I think from a lack of knowledge of these fields, it seems to people that people just pop opinions out of nowhere. And I do not minimize that some people may also have very traumatic experiences with religious figures or authorities who maybe have misused or not discharged that authority. That's certainly a big contributor as well. But at the end, our hearts and minds are worth guarding and worth understanding the deen appropriately. So encouraging one another to make the little sacrifices, the piece by piece, those add up over time, right? Joining a Quran halaqah, entering in Islamic studies, starting a circle of learning and discussion, even if it's sharing experiences and supporting one another and holding on to our Islamic identity. There's also a lot of virtual resources that can also supplement your studies. Inshallah, many Islamic universities in the US and across, or institutes, do either weekend intensives or summer intensives, or distance learning online. Wallahi, from the great experiences I had being a student in some of these universities, is so many of my teachers were not purely trained in Islamic studies. One of the most, I would say, one of the probably the strongest of our teachers, was a student, subhanAllah, who was a convert late in age. And so he didn't have a lot of these foundations, but he attained a mastery of the Arabic language. He had very, very high credentials, and mashallah, went on to also be very, very studied over 10 and 20 years until he himself was teaching at the level of major shuyukh as students, right? Another person, mashallah, was very, very deep in the field of neuroscience, had a very high accomplishment, and yet also was very grounded in the deen. So alhamdulillah, to be a good Muslim, you don't have to be a scholar of Islamic sciences. But for this group, I'm really encouraging us to set the bar higher. Many of you, mashallah, have a lot of opportunity for education, are going to touch spaces that will never intersect with a masjid, never intersect with an imam or a sheikh, and you will be the embodiment of Islam in those spaces. So I think to encourage one another and take those little opportunities, iqtinam al-furas, taking advantage of the small opportunities on the way, you would be surprised how it adds up over time. It really makes a very, very big difference, inshallah, and it can be a key to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opening these doors of knowledge for us.
When someone has a quick question or they want to look up a hadith, what resources do they use that are authentic? They want a quick answer. And what resources IAR have to answer these questions?
Some questions specifically about the hadith, or
Just in general about resources.
If the resources, depending on what the person is looking for, what's really being used a lot and an easy lookup reference is a website called sunnah.com. You can look it up, you can put part of the hadith. The only issue with that is that you have to have a little bit of knowing how to write, Arabiya, the keyword. So you want to look up something, you put a keyword in it, and it would give you that. If you have it in English, the keyword is the thing where you have to search for it. It might give you the answers. It might not, exactly know unless you know the keyword for it. So that's a quick reference. This website is mainly authentic. It does have few disagreed upon area where some of the references they would tell you this is a hadith da'if. It's a weak hadith, but actually it's not necessarily a weak hadith among all scholars of hadith. So some scholars of hadith do differ, where they bring actually different opinion to that. But if it's hadith sahih, if it's an authentic hadith, then they're all, this is very clearly said, and you can take it inshallah ta'ala with no doubt. That's if it's specifically you want to look up a hadith and the authenticity of that hadith. If you're looking up for more of a fiqh related question, honestly, this is a little bit of a tricky area where there is really no specific website or something that I know mainly, mashallah, all of you are heavily dependent on the question and answer website. I want to just share something with you that is very deep, but this is part of our tarbiyah. If there is anyone in this room that would relate deeply to that website for Sheikh Salih al-Munajjid, it would be myself, because he happens to be actually my teacher. We grew up in the same neighborhood, and I was his, the person that really have lived with him when he was not known. And we had it really the tough time where question and answer was basically the old-fashioned way of having it on note cards. And it takes forever for us, for when someone calls him, I remember in the office, that it would take a good 5 minutes, to go through, and we would be running crazy to find, okay, this box is for salah, this box is for, this is how it really started, and now how you see it. So if there is anyone that would relate and push you to look up the question and answer website, Islam, question and answer, it would be myself. However, I would not do that, honestly, to be honest with you, because we want you to also be an open-minded, that, heavily Sheikh Muhammad Salih al-Munajjid happened to also, was born in Saudi and grew up there. So he naturally relates very, very much to the madhab of the Hanbali madhab. So most of his answers would be something of relating to, or like his point of view would relate heavily to the Hanbali madhab. But the great thing about it is that he would explicitly say that the other opinion. But if you were to follow his own answers, it would be mainly the Hanbali madhab that he relates very heavily to. So it's a great website, it's a great reference, but I would not take it as the only reference. So that's for the fiqh reference. I highly recommend for you, if you're really deeply going into the fiqh ruling stuff, is every house should have the Fiqh Sunnah for Sheikh Sayyid Sadiq. I think that's an excellent book that everybody should have. where he really took it upon himself to bring the opinion that relates to everybody, to all kind of madahib, and he simplified it in a way that you guys look it up and don't get confused. So he's not like Sheikh Google will do you. The name of the book is called Fiqh Sunnah for Sheikh Sayyid Sabiq. Sabiq, yes. That's a great book. I highly recommend that. So that gives you a pretty much good reference on all the ahkam and rulings. That's for the fiqh, inshallah.
Just to spell that, inshallah, it's FIQH-US-SUNNAH. Fiqh Sunnah. It's available. The English translation of the first volume is available online, and the additional print copies have been a very nice print available. Just to very briefly recap and add, what Sheikh Muammar said on the Quran. Of course, the website Quran.com is very helpful, where you can search translation, Arabic, and the Arabic transliteration, the sound of the Arabic in the English language. Always remember that when you're looking at a translation of the Quran in English, to be careful with terminology and not to call this the Quran, because the Quran is unique, what is directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Arabic language without any human intervention. But these are very helpful English translations of the meaning of the Quran, but they are considered a category of tafsir, right? And so they are not infallible. A person could pick a word and the translation has inherent challenges. One of the contemporary tafsir that's very helpful for people is the tafsir of Abd al-Halim, Haleem. It's part of the Oxford World Classics collection. It reads in very clean English. It's the downside, of course, is that because it doesn't have a million parentheses and a lot of footnotes, that it also, sometimes if you have a verse that's confusing or something like that, then maybe you would need to go back to more explanation. Understand that no tafsir is perfect. Tafsir that's trying to give you more of the information will have a footnote and a note at the top and 50 parentheses, and that can be difficult to read. But the more you shorten it, the more details of meaning may not show through. There are also other English translations for people dealing with Christian or Jewish people that are used to reading the Bible, or I should say, the Bible and other sources in Old English. Then the translation of Yusuf Ali can be helpful, thou art and so on, but this can be a little bit difficult for especially young people, makes it sound like Shakespeare. So Abd al-Halim is very, very relatable. And also we have a translation at IR available for dawah if you need it. For Sunnah, remember that Sheikh Muhammad mentioned sunnah.com, with the caveat of the Sahih and so on is still a scholarly opinion that may not have all the detail. And if you don't find it on sunnah.com, does not mean it's not a hadith, because this has the most common ahadith, some of the big books. It's not exhaustive. If you're able to search in Arabic, www.durar.net, DORAR.net, has a wider collection of ahadith. However, you have to be a more advanced student because you have to be able to search in Arabic, and that will have everything. It will have fabricated hadith, fake hadith. So it's meant to help you search broader, but not everything you find there was said by the Prophet ﷺ with a high degree of likelihood. It's a more thorough research source. For those of you that are learning Arabic and want to search, there's a cool little technology trick. Microsoft has a product called Medin. Microsoft, M-A-R-E-N. There's another one that I forgot. The Arabic keyboard?
Just Google.
So, Jazakumullah khairan. So, Arabic keyboard, but these are things where you can type the sound of the Arabic in English and it'll turn it into Arabic for you. Or, actually click on the keyboard. So these are very helpful things as you're learning to search in Arabic primary sources, inshallah. For fiqh questions, this is a service that we offer at IAR, inshallah, to all of our local congregants when we can help you with a question. It takes patience. We get, hundreds of inquiries a year, so it might take a week and a half, because depending on our route, but we do make an effort to help you. But in general, when you're looking at a fiqh data bank, remember, as Imam Muammar mentioned, all of these fatawa, from top to bottom, were meant to be individual opinions for a particular person in a particular circumstance. Okay? So it's very helpful. It's very helpful that now you can search this. Maybe you find the same question. That doesn't mean that's the only opinion in Deen,
that doesn't mean that's the opinion for your situation. So especially for sensitive issues, we do encourage you to seek the guidance of, a local, a person of knowledge or scholar, trustworthy source to help you navigate that, inshallah. Going back to the questions answer very briefly, remember the flavors that we learned in class. Questions of experience. What does it mean to be growing up as a person of color in America today? What does it mean to be growing up as a woman or Muslim woman today? These are questions where when you ask many people, you get more knowledge of the experience directly. Every person that's been through the experience is the most right to speak about. Technical questions, which are most of what we're talking about today. Technical questions, when you discuss them in groups, is very helpful. Why? Because you're forced to see the world from the lens of other people. So actually the fact that we're doing this as a group instead of one-on-one helps us learning, because now you see it from different perspectives. We have different nationalities, men and women, all of these things coming together to look at technical questions. When you have questions related mostly to individual experience, trauma, things that are of conflict nature, relationships, generally these are not good questions to ask in a large group. Why? Because there is privacy to be maintained, especially if people are involved. We do not have right to speak about people outside of their presence, except in the exceptional circumstances with a trustworthy person trying to advise for help. And moreover, as the questioner asked earlier, it could introduce things that are outside of people's experience. Even this, remember that the class, we talked about some sensitive topics. Why did we talk about those topics? Because the data support that a majority of the room has had those experiences directly. And I can give you that data from multiple sources, locally and nationally. So when a problem becomes widespread, even if it's sensitive, it's drugs, it's relationships, it's alcohol, but if you look at the statistics, alcohol is definitely an issue among Muslim college youth today. It's not 1%, it's not 1 out of 100, then it becomes credible for speaking in a large group. When there are more isolated challenges, that is more helpful to speak about in a more focused group that you can support that person, inshallah. The last type, of course, is the unknown questions. Things that we experience during tragedy, during death, during life's difficult moments, during separation, where the most helpful thing can be to complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with our vulnerability, with our challenges. And then, inshallah, also if it's helpful to seek a counselor or a therapist for appropriate support, inshallah.
Next question is about the foundations of Islam, keeping up with the basics, and how to do it in the best way possible.
So on the foundations of Islam, I think an important word to consider about this is the issue of priorities. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made certain things in our deen fard, obligatory. And He made other things mustahab, encouraged and allowed. And other things, encouraged and preferred, and other things just allowed. Naturally, life, we go through cycles, ups and downs. A person should always understand, as the hadith mentions, that my servant, Hadith Qudsi mentions that my servant does not draw closer to me with anything more beloved to me than مِمَّا افْتَرَضْتُهُ عَلَيْهِ, than what I have obligated for him or her, meaning the fara'id. So on establishing the foundations of our deen starts by not minimizing the fara'id. The fara'id should be celebrated, should be highlighted, and should be a priority to you and to me, where by action we're showing that Allah is a priority in our lives. What He has commanded is a priority in our lives. Now, that can be a struggle, and we all have our shortcomings to deal with, but being honest and open with ourselves about that, starting with an honest assessment of our 5 prayers. What do they look like? Am I making Fajr exactly 5 minutes before sunrise? Or am I building my schedule, maybe sleeping earlier? Maybe, I used to joke, if the phone alarm is not working for you, there's these cool alarms online where it like launches a little copter into the air. If that's what you need to get out of bed, wallahi, go for it. You know, there was this crazy alarm one day that was on wheels, and when it goes, it like rolls off your night table. You have to chase it around. Or another one where you have to, well, whatever works for you. But at the end, we are building a habit that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made Fajr a priority, therefore it's a priority in my life. The quality of my salawat, what does it look like? The zakah is something that sadly many Muslims do not establish. And if you're in your first internship or your first job, there's some new territory for you to navigate. Be very proud. A great book online is Simple Zakat Guide, Simple Z-A-K-A-T Guide by Imam Joe Bradford. Or we can support you also in learning this, inshallah, if you need. But to learn how to do the calculations of your zakah, and wallah, if you have an internship and you made a couple $1,000s and you have $50 to give in zakah, give it with pride. This is the first time you're establishing this. And if you want to give more, give more. But building that into our lives. But the fara'id extend beyond the pillars of Islam. Imagine a house with no pillars. I mean, with no pillars, it's going to crumble. So we have to have our salah, our zakah, our siyam, our hajj. But a house with pillars, but nothing else, has nothing else. It's pillars standing, but you're not building anything. So other things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala obligated on us. Birrul walidain, caring for our families, silatul rahim, caring for the needy and the less privileged in our community, working, activism, standing for justice. All of these are part of that. I encourage people that are students of knowledge or activists such as yourselves to set a boundary, for a lower minimum for yourself that you do not go below. And it's better if you leave yourself some padding above the fara'id. So some sunan, some extra deeds, some secret deeds between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be thankful for this blessing that He has given you, and also to recognize that, you know, if I'm right on the fard line, guess what? My fara'id are not perfect. So I don't have any cushion. The sunan help build cushion. When you have more time, you do more, but have a minimum of learning, a minimum of Quran, a minimum of these acts of worship that are there. The other thing that's very helpful in the Foundations of Islam, I'll just be brief on this, is to seek out like-minded people. Seek out others that challenge you in your deen, right? One of our challenges is, in our deen, we're always racing against the bottom, right? So you want to be better at basketball, you look for a coach. You want to pick up swimming, you take a class and you're going 3 times a week and you're doing this. And you're challenging yourself with others. You're seeing yourself. You're seeing people that are smarter than you, better than you. But when it comes to deen, a lot of us are like, mashallah, only a couple % pray the 5 prayers. Allahu Akbar, I'm better than sliced bread. Like, I know you don't say that, but that's what happens when our bar is low. If you're the sheikh or the sheikha to all your friends, you need to find spaces where you're not the most knowledgeable about the deen and grow in those spaces. If all of your friends are your age bracket and you haven't seen the wisdom or the sacrifice of a person that is older in age, that may have more physical difficulty, and yet they are preceding you in salah and in rushing to Allah, you need to seek out that company. Because that bar is going to push you. And that accountability from mentors and from friends, good friends, can help you, inshallah, bring out the best in yourself. One can be accountable to themselves, of course, but other forms of accountability, or accountability to a mentor who is helping you, coaching you along, or accountability to peers that are not afraid to be your mirror, reflect the best qualities of you, but also help you, inshallah, get better in other areas.
Before we take our next question from the list, anything from the room? Any questions?
I have a quick question. So for like Hadees and other rulings, when there's multiple valid opinions, how do you choose which one to follow?
That's mashallah, very good question. So this is, if I would understand you well, there will be areas we have to understand where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with His wisdom allowed this flexibility in allowing more than one answer. And that really pertains that there are many people are living on different places on earth, where it really pertains to their culture, to their way of living more than others. And this is where the flexibility of fiqh comes. So to answer your question, let's separate, and this is just to simplify the answer, because the answer is, if we want to go into usul al-fiqh, like Imam Abu Talib talked about the principles of fiqh, then this would take us all night long, and honestly it would not be sufficient to address it. But just to simplify the answer of what really pertains to us, there are two, I would just summarize it into two categories. One category is where the scholars have come with a very, very solid rule in usul al-fiqh, where they said, لا اجتهاد في نص. There is no room for anybody to bring in a personal opinion if it goes against a clear-cut saying of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now somebody would wonder, how would a scholar go against a clear-cut saying of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? The answer is that that scholar that brought an opinion that happens to be clearly in contradiction with the saying of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam never received that hadith. Is that clear? So somebody would say, if the general rule is that any scholar, any opinion that goes against a clear-cut saying of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ should not be entertained. So this is agreed upon in all scholarship and all scholars of Islam. But someone would ask, how would a scholar give an opinion that would go against the saying of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ? The answer is, when that scholar gave that opinion, he did not have that clear-cut hadith available within his collection. As you know how the hadith were collected, it took many centuries, it took many years of that. So now the general rule is that if we're looking up an answer to something, and I find an answer that someone says, for example, you go to Hajj and you spend all this money, and it happens to be that you feel very down and very sick, and you don't want to leave Mecca and go to Arafah. And you would find an answer that says, actually, if that's because it's health related issue, you're fine. You can just sacrifice a sheep or a goat or a lamb, and you should be able to stay back in Mecca. You don't have to physically push yourself to go to Arafah. Whether this answer is one scholar or 1,000 scholar, this would not give any value, and it would be put on the side. Because there is a clear-cut hadith that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, Al-Hajju Arafah. Hajj will not be Hajj if you do not physically attend the Mount of Arafah. So I'm just bringing this as an example. There is no scholar that says that you can be away from Arafah. I'm just bringing an example where it conflicts with a really clear-cut saying. So that's one area where we don't have flexibility to pick and choose opinions. If there is a clear-cut saying of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ saying that, such and such ruling, we take that clear-cut hadith. The other one that I would say, what pertains to your question mainly, is that what if you actually look up an answer that has been disagreed upon the scholars, and all the ijtihad, all the opinions are really within the boundaries of the saying of Prophet Muhammad, meaning that the saying of Prophet Muhammad could be interpreted in different ways. The answer to that is that this is a room for flexibility where you respect all the opinions and you can adopt any opinion that you feel comfortable with. It doesn't mean necessarily that this is the easiest opinion. But if it happens to be that it is the easiest opinion that you pick up, it's absolutely fine. Because it's within that boundaries. Within that boundaries of that, all the interpretation of the scholars are heavily dependent on the saying of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. but the scholars came to interpret the hadith differently, different ways. And we let's bring an example to make it a little bit easier. So you look up the ruling on wiping, for example. Now it's winter time, and it is really, really, really challenging. And somebody really, let's say, loses their wudu very, very often, very frequent. And every time that they need to renew their wudu, they have to take off 3, 4, 6 jackets that they have on, especially in really cold areas, and they have to take off their socks. For this sisters, they have to take off their hijab and whatever. So this is an area where you look up the rulings, and you would have different opinions of the scholars. Some are saying, no, there is no room for you to do wiping except for necessities, only in necessities. And you have others that say, no, this is really open, and you don't have to have necessities. It's a rukhsa. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave it as an allowance, and you can actually access it at any time you want. So if you end up actually taking the easy answer of being able to wipe on socks, to wipe on your hijab, without really having to have an absolute necessities for it, you're absolutely fine, because you are within boundaries of understanding of scholars that have not differed with a clear-cut saying of Prophet Muhammad. It's really flexible. And those who want to restrict themselves to only washing and not wiping, we fully respect that. And those who actually pick up the opinion of wiping on their hijab and their socks, we fully respect that. And both are correct. And the scholars have agreed that we should not undermine any of the opinions. And you can apply this general rulings on many, many, many of the rulings that we have. Like another example, and I'm just giving to you as an example. You can apply the rulings on it now. You have a clear-cut saying of Prophet ﷺ says that there is no salah accepted without the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha. Here is a clear-cut hadith, right? There is another hadith that Prophet ﷺ says, if you enter the masjid and you find the imam in a position of ruku', and you actually catch the imam in the position of the ruku' before he says, Sami Allahu liman hamida, your rak'ah is accepted as is. You don't have to make it up. Now you just entered the masjid, you joined the imam in ruku', you never recited Surah Al-Fatiha. And the first one says that there is no salah without Surah Al-Fatiha. And this is where the scholars bring them together of another saying of Prophet ﷺ that says the salah of the imam is a salah for you. So the imam is making up all the shortcomings that we daydream, we distract, we what have you. The imam will cover that for you. So this is where the area is very flexible. If someone says, no, I have to read Surah Al-Fatiha even if I have to miss the rak'ah, we respect that. Somebody actually joins the ruku' and does not make up the rak'ah, we fully respect that. Because it's all within the understanding of that hadith, it's just different interpretation. And we respect all the opinions and we do not undermine any. And I took a little bit longer in the answer, you guys, because this you can apply in a lot of saying, so you don't get frustrated sometimes and say, why are the scholars differing on these things? Why do we have all this difference of opinions? Why can't it be clear-cut answers? Why can't? And there are many answers why you can. Subhanallah, just 2 days ago, you guys, I visited a friend of mine, a very dear friend of mine. I have always read some detailed fiqh issues about someone, being able to bring tahara to himself if he's kind of disabled. And you would read and you say, who's going to need this? And this is very, very detailed. You say it would never happen. But then you would have someone somewhere where actually it pertains to that someone, where they have to make tahara in a completely different way than the regular wudu or the regular tayammum, where some people actually come to a point where water is just 2 feet away from them, but they just can't reach to it. And a rock is right 2 feet away from them, but they just can't reach to it. So what they do? Water is available, they can't reach out to it. A rock is 2 feet away from them, but they cannot reach out to it. And the time of salah will go out. And this is where you would have some of the flexibility of fiqh that you have read before, and you said, who needs that? But then you will find somebody that actually needs it. And this is why the flexibility of fiqh is available. So just wanted to share with you that, alhamdulillah, that flexibility is something very important that we should respect, inshallah.
Our next question is, what is the best way to address the negative interpretation of our deen using obscure hadith?
So in this question, I'd like to bring us back to Surah Ali Imran, Surah number 3, verse number 7. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هُوَ الَّذِي أَنزَلَ عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابِ مِنْهُ آيَاتٌ مُحْكَمَاتٌ هُنَّ أُمُّ الْكِتَابِ وَأُخَرُ مُتَشَابِهَاتٌ. He is the one who has revealed the scripture to you. From it are the foundational verses, are clear verses. They form the foundation of the book, and others that are probabilistic, meaning open to interpretation or uncertain, would be an appropriate translation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is linked to what the answer that Sheikh Muhammad just said from a fiqh standpoint, are certain things and foundational things and important things. Allah Azza wa Jal revealed things that are universal, that are unequivocal, meaning not open to difference, that are clear, and that all Muslims agree on. Something we often forget when we talk about the madhahib or schools of ideology and so on, are things that they agree on. I'm not giving you a figure of speech. I'm being very serious. There are other religious traditions where there are literally hundreds and hundreds of books, versions of the main scripture. There is only one Quran. Everybody that puts up a fake Quran online, it's gone in a second. Why? Because millions of people, memorize it, because it's recorded. So not even the madhahib and so on, Sunni, Shia, other texts, all accept the same Quran. All accept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. Overwhelming majority of the ummah, 99.9% of the ummah throughout history, has an unequivocal acceptance of the Prophet ﷺ as the last and final messenger, right? And so on and so on and so forth. So these are foundational matters. The Day of Judgment, which Quraysh opposed more vigorously than praying any way they wanted. They were willing to compromise on prayer. We'll pray to Allah one year, we'll pray to the idols one year. They just didn't want Allah to bring them to account. Why do we oppress women? Why do we take advantage of people? Why do we take advantage of the weak? All of these things are clear, crystal clear. So Allah says there are ayat that are clear, they are the foundation of the book. And others, they are uncertain, meaning they're open for interpretation. And the rest of the verse talks about how people deal with these verses. That there are people, فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ زَيْغٌ, those that have crookedness in their hearts, they seek what? The uncertain. In other words, they seek to found their understanding on what? Other than the foundation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave. But those endowed with knowledge know that it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala till the end of the verse. Seeing this, I want you to draw, I'm going to do a virtual drawing for you. I want you to draw a pyramid, okay? Split into 3 levels. Which is going to be the least wide level on this pyramid? The top, alhamdulillah, still awake, okay? All the way outside, I want you to draw a big circle that encompasses the pyramid. You with me? We'll start at the bottom of the pyramid or the top. It's up to me. Jazakallah khair, Yusuf. So kind, mashallah. We'll start at the bottom of the pyramid. This is a classification of the Islamic sciences from a number of scholars. The bottom of the pyramid, I'm going to put ulum al-masadir, the foundation or the source disciplines or sciences. I don't like the word sciences because it's too sciencey, but I'm talking about sciences or disciplines of knowledge. So the disciplines, the source disciplines. So the bottom level is called what? Source disciplines. Somebody tell me what's the sources of the primary sources of Islam? Quran and Sunnah. So those are on the bottom of the what? The pyramid, the foundation. You with me? Level number 2 are called ulum al-wasail. The tool disciplines or the means by which you access other sources. Tell me, what's an example of one of the wasail ulum in terms of categories of disciplines of Islamic knowledge?
Interpretation of like the Quran.
Okay, so the interpretation of Quran. Notice that this isn't tafsir. This is usul al-tafsir. What are the rules for a person to interpret the Quran? What's allowable or not? What's a valid opinion and not? What does it take to be a mufassir? All of that is in a field called usul al-tafsir, the principles of Quranic exegesis or Quranic interpretation. What else? So all of the usul are in this category. So usul al-hadith or mustalah al-hadith, hadith criticism, terminology, and authentication is in this. So how do I know a sahih hadith from a da'if? What do those mean? How do we judge them, etc., etc. Also usul al-fiqh, which we talked about earlier, is the rules for Islamic legal rulings. We're missing a really important one. Really important one. What's something very important that bounds what's an acceptable interpretation of the Quran? I have to be true to the what? If I want to be true to the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I have to be true to the rules of what? The Arabic language. Arabic language is from these sciences as well, right? That's why, shuyukh will actually study old Arabic love poetry and Jahili poetry and poetry about alcohol. Why all this headache? So that, because how else do I know if I'm reading what I want into the Quran or reading true to the text? So all this effort on language. So how many levels of the pyramid we have so far? 2. Top level is called ulum al-maqasid, the objective disciplines. So when I have the sources and the tools to access them, I apply them. Apply them to things like what? Fiqh is a big application, right? So the rulings that Imam Muammar was talking about. Tafsir, etc., etc. The application of these, okay? And then around this pyramid is what? A circle. We call these ulum al-mutammimat, the completing disciplines, okay? The icing on the cake, if you mean. Like what? Stories of the Sahaba. Stories of the ulama. Seerah in the 9 applied sense. So all of these things, when you're sitting in a khutbah and your heart just feels like it's going to lift out of your chest because it's so inspirational. And you see a person or you interact with a person. All of this, if it's grounded, you're seeing the Quran in action. You're seeing the hadith in action. But without it, you wouldn't know where to ground it in. Now I want you to take a hard look at that pyramid. Everybody looking at it? I want you to take a critical lens to the journey of you and most American Muslims in learning Deen. And tell me, in what order did you access those disciplines? Most American Muslims learn these in exactly the opposite order that I've just mentioned. Most of us were introduced to the Deen in poorly organized weekend schools. I'm not talking about here, I grew up somewhere else, but in general, wherever you grew up, more often it's a poorly organized, non-directed than a mature, intellectually vibrant space. And inshallah, may Allah reward those. This is part of the responsibility of this generation to continue the huge sacrifices that were made. And if you grew up somewhere where you actually had these resources, you should be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A lot of us did not. A lot of us didn't have a masjid to call home, didn't have imams or religious leaders, didn't have Sunday schools. I'm not just brushing away these efforts. I'm talking about the majority of American Muslims and what they experience. And if your experience in Raleigh or Durham or this area was different, you have a huge blessing to be grateful for. Many people learned it in quick camps, in weekends, but never took the time to sit in a weekly introduction. What does Allah say and not say in the Quran? What is the key message of the hadith? Which makes us vulnerable to what? To being presented obscure hadith and having our deen shatter on top of our heads, because we don't have a strong grounding in what's there. Sadly, this has become a mark of Islamophobes and a mark of other voices as well, that they seek out these obscure things, not because there are not answers or scholarship to this, but because they're not known to the average Muslim. So they insert doubt and uncertainty into the heart. You want to know an incredible irony and a sad irony? Maybe some of you will be inspired and help us with this research project at IAR or elsewhere. Believe it or not, a lot of Orientalist and kind of Islamophobic arguments were extracted from the Islamic tradition itself. Meaning what? Meaning that there are old books that deal with Radd al-Shubuhat, dealing with doubts and obscure matters, written by Muslim scholars. So many people who are against the deen understand the deen better than you and I. So they literally go back into the books, take an obscure hadith where the answer is right after it in that book, and they take it without the answer. This has been shown in a lot of research. And actually, we're just engaging some new research at IAR from some books that have just arrived overseas. But there have been, some good research criticizing this in some of the Islamic universities, but the research remains obscure, remains largely out of English and out of touch. But this is a problem where we have to get reversed into our tradition. So the basis is that we learn what the core of the deen is. And when you have that, you may not have the answer, but you won't be intimidated by an exception. And listen, I always tell people, look, you guys, some of you like me took physics in undergraduate, mashallah, you still don't understand half the textbook. Still sitting on there, right? Are you there, man?
I'm there.
I got a degree in it. I still don't understand half of it. But sitting there on the shelf, but you passed the exam. It's a big deal. It's okay that you don't understand half, right? It's an ongoing study. So it's normal that there may be something in the Quran I don't understand the first time. Why leave this whole beauty that I do understand? That's making me a better person, a better son or daughter, a better worker, a better work ethic, because of one hadith or one ayah I didn't understand. Take your lack of understanding, go ask. Somebody gives you a wacky answer, go ask somebody else. And be patient and seek knowledge. Inshallah, we have to learn to put these things in context. And that diagram, if you really consider it, will help you prioritize your Islamic studies so you can put things in proper context, inshallah.
The next question is, in Islam, do you have to forgive those that have harmed us? Being abused as a child, do I have to forgive my abuser?
This is such a difficult question, and the answer is not going to be an easy answer because we can definitely be extremely sensitive to the cases that people go through and the trauma that some people get inflicted with and tested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So by all means, if my answer comes to be just a classical easy answer, this is the right answer. But that does not mean that if someone is struggling with this answer, that this person is not on a good level. But rather, all we're trying to strive harder in order to get to the highest level where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would love to see us. But if we fall short, it does not mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like us at all. But rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves for us to strive to the highest level where He would accommodate us on the Day of Judgment with the highest level of reward as well. So the answer is definitely in Islam is yes, we have to forgive. How do we forgive? This is a big answer, and it takes a lot of sacrifice in order to come to that level. It might necessarily take a short time. It might be over a period of time where you actually end up forgiving somebody. but then this is the goal, is to forgive someone who has done you wrong or abused you. So I'm just going to give an example and then end with a suggestion, inshallah. The example is that I can't think of anything harder, of more sensitive, than what took place against Prophet Muhammad's household, where in Medina, the Prophet of Allah, the master of mankind, the most beloved, soul on the face of the earth, gets tested with his own honor, with the most loved one that he loves on the face of the earth, and that is his wife Aisha radiallahu anha wa ardaha. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of all the people of Medina, chooses the household of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, chooses the most one that he loves the most to be tested, Aisha radiallahu anha, with her honor. And that is like the most highest precious thing that every one of us, let alone for every female on the face of the earth, that doesn't want anyone to come close to touch and come close to insult her honor. So that was a big test, where the hypocrites of Medina have accused her of having a relationship with somebody just because of the fact that when Prophet ﷺ went on on a journey where they wanted to after they finished the expedition, and on their way back, he wanted somebody to make sure that everyone is back within his group and intact. And it happens that Sayyidatuna Aisha radiallahu anha was left back, and the story is long, but this is what happened. And the one that was assigned to look back and to make sure that everyone intact within Prophet ﷺ group was Safwan. And he happened to find her, and then when he found her, he brought her back. And as they brought her back, the hypocrites of Medina started making the rumors that, this was not done by coincidence. This was by design, and this meant to be so they can be left alone, and then they would do a haram act. And this was a test to the household of Prophet ﷺ, and this was really deeply took a toll on Sayyidatuna Aisha radiallahu anha wa ardaha. Long story short is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the ayat of innocence and to clear the image and to clear the honor of Sayyidatuna Aisha radiallahu anha wa ardaha in Surah An-Nur. And this is such a great surah for you to read, because it really uplifts your besides the rulings, it just uplifts that level of forgiveness, that you would see how would you come ever close to forgive somebody that actually did you wrong in a way that really wrecked off your reputation, really messed up your status in a society and what have you. And it wasn't that easy, honestly. So the forgiveness didn't just happen that Allah revealed the verses and khalas, she forgives, or Prophet Muhammad ﷺ would forgive. So it was really heavy on their soul and on their heart. But then again, they're training themselves to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it happened that the second, or a little bit far cousin of our mother Aisha radiallahu anha, have been also part of the problem, where he accused her of such wrongdoing. And his name was Mistah, and he really, not only that he did this, he really he was very unappreciative to the household of Sayyidina Abu Bakr, who was looking after him, was really funding him, was spending on him. And he ended up actually saying, or advancing the rumors against our mother Aisha. So it was very difficult for even Sayyidina Abu Bakr to let go and to forgive. So that's not an easy thing. Again, I don't want you to take this lightly. It was very difficult. So they did not really hit back, but it wasn't really easy for them to forgive. But then the process, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to really kind of cleanse our hearts. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't demand it immediately. As the case got cleared, as the dust got settled, as life went back to normal, day by day affairs and whatever, people are acting, differently because you still have these grudges. It's not easy to clear them out. You see the person that just done you wrong and you really cannot forgive, but you just let go. And that's by itself is a great, and that's part of the answer. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is expecting from you. Now to go on a higher level, this is where you would actually forgive. So there is two answers to the question. One answer is the forgiveness of you not having a revenge, not really getting back at someone, not really showing your dark side of want a revenge or take somebody back and get back at someone just because they've done you wrong. That's a high level. That by itself is a great level if you would accomplish. Now the highest level is for you to actually clear out these grudges out of your heart and to actually go back to normal status with that person, especially if they were your parents. If I understand the question, even if they abused a person, if they abused their child, maybe it's a trauma that they themselves have gone through. They didn't know any better. Maybe they were abused themselves and they didn't know how to treat you well. Maybe we're gonna put so many maybes. The answer is, the final answer came as revealing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as He started preparing people for that high level. And Sayyidina Abu Bakr was not able to forgive. Our mother Aisha was not able to forgive the second or third cousin of hers, because that was really, it really hurts. We're funding you, we're looking after you, you are really part of our family structure, you're part of our within our family ties and what have you, and you are part of the people that goes against us. No appreciation or none whatsoever. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed in the same surah of Surah An-Nur, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلْيَعْفُوا وَلْيَصْفَحُوا. If you would just to read literally the Arabiya of al-afu and al-safh, both means the same thing. When you forgive al-afu, when you give safh on somebody, it's the same thing, it's forgive. But the difference is big and huge. Al-afu is the first stage, which is that, okay, I forgive, I'm not getting back at you, but honestly, I don't want to see your face. And you have the right to. Example of that, Prophet Muhammad himself did it with Wahshi, the one who killed his uncle. So he forgave him, and he said, you are to be treated justly like anybody else. But when he said, try to avoid me, don't get too close to me, because I'm not ready, honestly. I'm not ready to see your face like this. I'm not ready to take you as a close companion. It's going to take time. And some scholars have said that this was not permanent. That, that was momentarily when he entered Islam. So that was just a wall that, because when you want to forgive truly. So that's forgiveness. وَلْيَعْفُوا. But then there is a higher level. Then that's called as-safh. وَلْيَصْفَحُوا. As-safh is to go actually to bring back that person to your circle. This is really, really high. This is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلْيَعْفُوا وَلْيَصْفَحُوا, but didn't stop right there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, continuing of the ayah, أَلَا تُحِبُّونَ أَن يَغْفِرَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. Wouldn't you like for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to actually cleanse you from everything, and you would take an absolute clear page on the Day of Judgment of accountability, where you don't have to face even questioning, where you don't even have to face absolutely of the hardship of awaiting your accountability. It's a big high level, but then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you a big high reward. وَلْيَعْفُوا وَلْيَصْفَحُوا أَلَا تُحِبُّونَ أَن يَغْفِرَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. This was the only time, absolutely the only time, where Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhu ardah and our mother Aisha radiyallahu anha ardaha actually went to the highest level of forgiveness. and they brought back Mistah to their circle. And this is where Sayyidina Abu Bakr went back to spend on him and to bring him back and to praise him. Again, like the relationship used to happen. And that wall was demolished. But it took time. So inshallah ta'ala, the answer is on two levels. The first level is what's expected of us, and that is the afu. And then as-safh is the highest level where you actually clear out these grudges and bring back that person to your circle. By all means, especially if it's your parent, you would forgive inshallah ta'ala, because again, remember, they might be victim of the same problem. They might very likely have been abused themselves and they didn't know any better. That's the only style of tarbiyah that they knew, and we just need to give them that benefit of doubt. Ya Rabbi, inshallah. Jazakallah. So I'm taking only from the moderator right there.
Okay. We'll take any questions from the audience.
Yeah, so myself.
Yusuf, do you have a question?
Alhamdulillah, such a good moderator. So I know that like in times of when someone, I guess, does something wrong to you, you have the choice to either forgive them and then inshallah find a great like bounty on the day of judgment, or this might not be the only option to go about it, but I also know that you have the right to like make dua against that person. Or am I saying it like?
So you're talking about if somebody done you wrong, like dhulm, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a very good follow-up. If somebody has done you wrong where they took some of your rights, you absolutely have the right to make dua against that person because they took your right and never gave it back to you. But if we're talking about just a relationship wrongdoing of an abuse, somebody didn't know better how to treat you, somebody psychologically or mentally or verbally abused you and what have you, this is where you don't make dua against that person, but rather you forgive inshallah and you go on the steps that we have talked about. But by all means, if somebody took a right from you, forgiveness doesn't mean that you don't ask for your right back. Is this clear inshallah? So that has nothing to do with you asking your right back. But remember what Mistah did. It didn't mean that he just kept talking. He went into the problem. He spoke ill. But then when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cleared the issue, he went very apologetic. He asked for forgiveness and, he realized his mistakes. But if somebody does you wrong and arrogantly does not come back to ask for your forgiveness, by all means, you are a madhloom and you can make dua against that person because they're being arrogant. They're not different than the stand of shaitan when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked him to come back and he never did. So yeah, by all means, that's different inshallah.
Our next question is about, they asked if there's a hadith about most women going to hell, and also tying into that, why are women required to be obedient to men?
So the first question, inshallah, we'll take this in two parts. And we'll actually do this as a group. So, inshallah, a person comes to you and says that your Prophet ﷺ says in a hadith that I saw most of the occupants of hellfire as women. And this is clearly against women. This person is saying this. And it's a hadith. How can we understand this? Where would you start if we as a group now are going to look into this question? Where would you start?
What's the validity of the hadith?
What's the
Validity
of the hadith? So we might do some research, we might ask. Remember what Sheikh Muammar said, being authentic, sahih or not, and so on is a scholarly opinion. It can differ, but in this case, this hadith comes in narrations in both Bukhari and Muslim. It's an extremely highly authentic hadith, meaning the very high likelihood that the Prophet ﷺ said this hadith, which we've only quoted a translation in English. So now what? What's the next step? If we're researching this together, we're saying, how do we prepare an answer for this? What do we do next?
Context.
So a context, right? So it looked to what in terms of the context? This is a very good point. So what elements are you looking for in terms of context?
Before, after.
anything before or after, what was happening at that point in Sirah, also what was happening what? In that conversation. A hadith can, particularly with narrations, can have other narrations that have an additional context literally in that hadith, a longer hadith. What else? What other context is important?
What majority of the hellfire is women?
Huh?
Is it the overwhelming
So
majority?
you bring up different things about the meaning of the hadith. That's definitely important. In terms of context, we're missing a very important element of context. Who's speaking? Oh, wallahi, it's not a trick question. Who is speaking? Question mark. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it would be helpful to know what? Who he's speaking to. Okay? So all of these are elements of what? Context. Now listen to this carefully. Write this down. The most basic context of the Quran comes in what? By researching the ayah, seeing if the ayah is actually there, and at least you have the context before and after, and then you can research in tafsir the context in history. So in particular ayat that are technical, ayat of war and peace, it might be saying war about a specific group of people, not about all people at all moments in history. So that's how context, a little bit about how context is established in the what? In the Quran. You still awake or you fall asleep? Huh? Context of the hadith is inherently more complex, but it is possible to researcher to get assistance in researching. Okay? Why is context of the hadith more complex? Number one, the Quran reads like the words of no human being, because it is not the words of a human being, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The words of the hadith read like eloquent, exceptional speech in 7th century Arabia. The Prophet ﷺ is the most eloquent of people, but he is a human being. Therefore, mashallah, somebody sees the Quran and says, وَجَاءَتْ سَيَّارَةٌ, there was a car that came in the desert to Prophet Yusuf. And you say, may Allah help you, you got a long way to go, bro. Why? Because you're using sayyara in the present context. You haven't thought about the context of language in that time. So many of the expressions of the Arabs, right? We have our own weird expressions that I've shared with you before, like break a leg, bro. MashaAllah, man. Hasad Central, trying to destroy the brother before he goes up and does the performance. No, this is our expression. So the Arabs had expressions. May your mother lose you. How could you say that? These are all expressions of culture that has to be understood in the cultural context of the time. You with me? So what was the hadith? What was the hadith? The question was about what? That the Prophet ﷺ saw that most of the occupants of women in hellfire. This is not the hadith. This is one line of a much longer hadith. There's step one. The hadith itself is much longer. Where does this particular hadith occur? In history. Anybody know? It occurs, there's a different area, but this one is much later, but good thought. This particular hadith occurs actually after Hijjatul Wada, after the farewell pilgrimage. That's a context. Who is the Prophet ﷺ speaking to? He is speaking actually to a group of women, as comes in the narration of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, who at that time was a young child, so he was with the women. So he observed this. The Prophet ﷺ gave the farewell pilgrimage speech, and then as comes in the narration, he crossed the lines and came to address, he had addressed some men, and in the farewell speech, by the way, what did he speak about women? It's a very famous line. Allah fin nisa, like be cautious. He exhorted all people to be cautious about their treatment of women. This is literally just before this hadith. Then he crosses over the lines of men and comes to the women and puts out a cloth on the ground. Why did he do it? But you know? Because the hadith is in the context of fundraising. He was encouraging the women to give because there was a party that was about to go out in a military expedition, and they had to fundraise for it. There's element of context number one. I don't know about you if you've ever sat with my dear Imam Muhammad in a fundraiser, but I always feel like if I don't open my pocketbook, I'm going to be going straight to hellfire and I'm going to be in big trouble. And you feel that motivation, but it's important. I'm saying that so we can bring the meaning closer, that he's doing a fundraising speech to a group of women. Secondly, this is very important. What did the women around the Prophet ﷺ look like? I'm going to ask you some uncomfortable questions. Were they pushovers? Were they quiet? Were they without opinion? Did they not ask the Prophet ﷺ? The women, especially even actually the women of Medina, were praised about this. That their modesty and hayat did not cause them not to ask about their deen. So they were very, very forward look. And they were praised about this even over the women of Mecca. It wasn't a denigration and particularly when you study these women, and we say this with the utmost respect. I'm asking these pointed questions because I know you're going to be asked them. I don't think, we want to always address the companions, men and women, with the highest terms of respect. But I'm emphasizing to you, when you read the seerah of our mother Aisha radiallahu anha is a strong, confident, opinionated woman. She's brilliant. Many ulama considered her to be the premier scholar among all the Sahaba, men and women. The second most prolific narrator of hadith. Our mother Zainab bint Jahsh was an extremely intelligent woman. Our mother Khadija bint Khuwaylid was looked up to by everybody, men and women, for her maturity, poise, and presence. And other people that were quiet or meek or reserved, whether women or even men, like we could say this with due respect about Uthman ibn Affan, who had a different personality than Umar ibn al-Khattab. They did this because of their personality, not because they're shallow people. They have the right to be more shy or more outgoing, more introverted or extroverted, just like you and I. But we say this because it is expected that if the women understood it to be a criticism of all women, they were way too respectful to have dismissed the Prophet. But what would they have immediately have done? What would they immediately have done?
Question.
Immediately they would have asked. And in fact, they do ask in this hadith, but about other things, which shows you their state of mind. The reason is because this is very hard to translate. If some of you know Arabic, you can study these different types of majaz and language. But the Prophet ﷺ is using a form of linguistic exaggeration and is using a form of playfulness or lightheartedness as well, right? So in part of this hadith, when the Prophet ﷺ says that I have seen you as the majority of the people of hellfire, the women ask why. But they don't ask why assuming that he's denigrating all women, because the Prophet ﷺ never denigrated anybody throughout his whole life. Men or women, light-skinned or dark-skinned, Arab or non-Arab. He never did it. They asked him why to understand. When he explained, just as sometimes when he was addressing men, he criticized them with some of the vices that are more common to men, or some of the behavior that's more common to men. For example, the Prophet ﷺ criticizes physical aggression. He often does so using the male pronouns because more men do this than women. It's a thing in Arabic that is clear in Arabic, may not translate over. So similarly, and the women asked him why. The Prophet ﷺ used certain expressions and even a certain lightheartedness. He gave the expression that about their husbands, that they might spend their whole lives, in doing good things, and they would make one mistake, and then that would be erased in their mind. Why is the Prophet ﷺ doing this? Because some of their husbands are about to leave and never come back. So in that context, just as he addressed the men with specific things, he's addressing the women with certain things to encourage giving and encourage a type of repentance and reconciliation, because a person might have a biting regret forever if they leave in that context. The Prophet ﷺ, so, in that context, you're talking about cursing and so on. The Prophet ﷺ, also in the narration, at the end of the hadith, how did the women respond? Because we have the response of the women. Did they feel like second-class Muslims? Did they feel like them? No, the narration says they took off all their rings and jewelry and started filling the cloth, right? So the context is very clear that they were motivated by the description of the Prophet ﷺ, just as he had motivated men in different mechanisms, right? This brings us to a very tricky piece on context. And I'm not going to mince words here, and I want you to be very critical and challenge this point. One of the biggest abuses of context is to rip a hadith out of its context and to bring it towards our own. So we were joking about the sayyara being a car, right, in our context. But what's happening here is very normal to have a question about the hadith. The women there had a question about the hadith and they asked it. But that's not how most people present this hadith today. Most people present the hadith in our context of feminism, chauvinism, clash of the sexes. So you read our own problems into a people that did not have them. Again, I'm challenging you. Somebody read the story of Sayyidah Aisha and tell me she's not a confident woman. They'd be nuts, insane. She's more intelligent, more confident than many of us, right? And it shows. She's very forward in her opinion. So and. These are who these people were. So the Prophet ﷺ, it's normal for this to be a challenging hadith to understand, especially if you don't have Arabic, when he uses certain expressions. When he talks about women, there are certain linguistic expressions. We can go into more detail if you're curious. But these had a meaning that was clear in their mind and that they reacted to in the moment by giving and by forgiving. Because for some of them, their husbands would never would come back. For others, it was a way of encouragement to give in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and most of them, except for nurses and caretakers, would not literally be going out in the military expedition. So they don't want to be left behind. No Sahabi ever, except they heard that this is a person of Jannah, this is a person of that. They're like, I want a piece of that too. And so their giving was a way of participating in the military defense that was facing the thing. And of course, in this context, who was about to leave and never come back to dunya? The Prophet ﷺ was about to pass away. He knew it. They did not know it. So also, it is a disservice to the character of the Prophet ﷺ to read our struggles with sexism, with racism, and so on, to someone that never put someone down in their entire lives. Someone that was never unchaste in their entire lives. Someone that was never indecent in his entire life, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So again, normal question, but I want to take this question and show you how such an overwhelming question can be come at from every angle if we build literacy in our deen. We could go the more technical route. I could talk to you about majaz and hyperbole and exaggeration and mubalagha. All of that is in the hadith. And if you want to study language, it's all there. All these linguistic contracts. But you know what really makes your heart rock solid? Who was this person, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and who are the people around him? Is it consistent that people would be called, like the Sahabiyat, would be called second-class citizens and losers, and they would just not ask, not wonder? They clearly did not take it like that. So the ulama have suggested different literal explanations, such as the fact that at the end of the time, women are literally the majority of earth. So hadith indicates that they are 50-1. Other explanations, but some ulama have leaned to the fact that the entire expression is not literal in the first place. All of these on the details are admissible interpretations, but we understand the expression of the Prophet ﷺ. Many ulama have said it's not literal. Those that have said it literal find easy explanation that women literally making the majority of humanity, especially at the end of time. But however, what is clear is the intent of the words was not denigration or putting down of women. Is there questions about how we approach this? Because this would be a helpful way to approach the questions about this specific hadith, which is found in both the collections of Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim. Yes.
So you said that like the response that Muhammad Rasulullah gave was more in a satirical manner. Does that take away from like the validity of what was said or how the message is to be interpreted?
Jazakallah khairan for the clarification. Maybe I wasn't clear. So in one part, I don't mean the whole hadith is a satire. I mean in one part, the Prophet ﷺ is lighthearted and almost playful. when they say why, just as he mentions a certain behavior, he talks about the in some relationships, how basically a person has one strike. They could live everything and then one strike and like, you've never done anything right for me. So he said that in Arabic in a very lighthearted way that the women did not rebel to. They were like, oh, okay, he's pointing this out to encourage us to, forgive and make amends, especially again with the heavy context that some of them might have lost, might have been separated forever for this dunya until the hereafter. But the whole hadith is not a satire, it's serious, but it's not literal in its expression. It's using linguistic expressions to get a point across, to encourage people to give, and also to have an honest look at these shortcomings, right? Many of us have the problem that we are one strike with our friends, women and men. The Prophet ﷺ did not exclude women to be the only ones with this characteristic. He was talking to a group of women, but many of us have this problem. The Prophet ﷺ talks about cursing, and many of us have the problem that when we're angry, we curse, men and women. So the Prophet ﷺ is talking about real behaviors that should be a source for us to repent, and it encouraged people to give, because when we have shortcomings, we give to make up for them. Because he was talking to women, he talked to women. But that doesn't mean that these behaviors are only found in women. In fact, some men have these behaviors worse than women. But in the context, he was speaking to a group of women and addressed them in a way that they connected and understood. Reading this as explicitly and only about women for these behaviors would not be supported by the many other ayat or ahadith that criticize these behaviors in general, and the many ayat that talk about the equality of men and women. Very briefly on the question of, I believe the question was why women have to be obedient to their husbands and not vice versa. This is a long question, right? But I think we can bring out some of the beginning meanings. Actually, Imam Muammar and I are really eager to start like a premarital and early marital support education program. We're doing a lot of work on it. If any of you have a passion in this space, we'd love to have your discussions and your help, inshallah. But this is a good example of the types of skills we need to understand before we get into a relationship. First of all, I've said this to you many times, I'll say it again. Technical terms are not understood by translation. They are understood by definition. Technical terms are not understood by translation. They are understood by, wallahi, I just gave you the answer. Wallahi, I swear, I just gave. Why do I say that? By using the word obedience, I may bring in connotation in English of subservience or so on that is not intended. So I have to come back to the overall system. Now remember the puzzle analogy from class? Remember? Don't take a puzzle piece out, look at it, say this is unfair. Put it back, look at the whole system. How is a marriage governed? What are the rights and responsibilities of marriage? Understand and then judge. So Islamically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم. That men are the qawamun. Qawam comes from the same root in Arabic meaning qa'im, which often is translated as sustainer, maintainer, but actually I think a very helpful English translation is standing in service. Qawam means standing a lot. So you know when it's like when a person is standing in service, they're constantly seeing to needs back and forth. So Islamically, a woman has almost no financial responsibilities except for herself that are mandated on her. These are all the men. Now, if two people want to work together and afford more than they could afford to by themselves, they can do that. But a husband has no right for his wife, to have money inheritance and ask her for, while he does not discharge his responsibility. There are many different formulas, all of which are allowable, alhamdulillah, in a marriage. And you have dual income families, single income families, etc. But at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave both man and the woman responsibilities to execute in the system of the family of the marriage. Both of them are responsible. Both of them will be questioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about their execution of these responsibilities to each other, to their children, and to the other stakeholders of the family. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave men an additional degree of responsibility in Al-Quran Al-Kareem. قال تعالى وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. Men have a degree over them. Many ulama consider this a degree in the responsibility. With it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave men an additional degree of authority or to discharge this responsibility. Now, many ulama considered this authority to be conditional. Give you an extreme example. Once there was a couple. It's a very sad story, unfortunately. From the day of the marriage, this gentleman, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala correct, all of our affairs. This man never worked, never earned an income for the family, and this woman was complaining of this situation. She had given him multiple years where she had been the exclusive breadwinner, and he wasn't. You go from promising to study to promising to work, and all that was happening was laziness at home while she was over-sacrificing to try to keep giving this thing. And when we met them, the way this person would address the person is like, well, my command to you is that you should do such and such. We told them, you have abused the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for many of us, when we think about the concept of ta'ah, that's the picture we have in our head. A lazy, privileged, irresponsible man sitting on a throne, throwing out dictatorial comments. This is what many of us picture in our head as a comic. This is not the system. The system is that both of them are responsible. And just as in a shura situation, any organization, that it is expected that decisions are made by consensus, by consultation, by discussion. However, in family decisions, where ultimately there are the discussion and so on, in a classical interpretation of the Quran, in these situations, a man does have the right to essentially make the decision and carry the extra degree of responsibility. And a Muslim woman here, just like let's say in an organizational context, a person may be in an organizational board and debate vigorously and offer it, but then accept the will of the group and carry it out. Similarly, part of her inshallah, worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in these situations that she would support the family decision after this. Her husband made it, recognizing that the husband also takes the extra share of responsibility and accountability before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A functional couple will arrive at these situations rarely. Just as a functional organization will usually make a decision by consensus, not by a 51% vote. You understand what I'm saying? So, an example of a situation, middle of the night, I think this is a safe street, husband doesn't, we don't have an hour to discuss it to figure out whether somebody's waiting with a knife in that dumpster. So in that situation, even if a woman really holds that opinion, she might let the debate go and go with it, recognizing and expecting the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the men would also expect the accountability before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Similarly, on discussions of schooling, on discussions of whatever, it would be responsible. But at the end, if there's not a meeting of the mind, no ship can sail where there is not a clear way to make a decision in a different zone. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave this additional degree responsibility. As the Prophet ﷺ says, leadership is a source of regret and sadness on the day of judgment. This is not a crown to be worn. This is a responsibility to be heavily shouldered. Similarly, a righteous, upright man will often comfort his wife by going her way in decisions where they feel like this is, not going to affect, inshallah, or decisions where both paths are valid. But if there is a difference of opinion that would really affect the family, such as is really not able to get a job in the city, they want to live in the city, but neither him or her can provide, and they need to move, or these other types of difficult decisions, these are very healthy case studies, by the way, to go through in a courtship process, in your engagement or whatever. A helpful book, by the way, is called Qawama Family Leadership in Islam by Dr. Muhammad Rida Bashir, which includes both a discussion of this and active case studies on appropriate use of this responsibility and abuse and misuse of this responsibility. And discussing these complex case studies that are simulating real life is a very helpful exercise for potential groom and bride to feel out these decisions, simulate them with each other in a courtship process, getting to know each other for the point of view of marriage. Ultimately, a family has millions of difficult decisions to make in front of them. Ask your elders, ask your parents. Nobody can forecast the decisions that they will make in a life. In your engagements, you roll out this rosy life, and then a test comes from nowhere. You have a child that is born with special needs. You have a parent that departed life earlier than you expected. You were going to study to this, but then you had to go and earn, you were the only breadwinner for the family. What follows you is not your dreams of the engagement. What follows you is the man and the woman and the way they approach decisions together. Because almost every decision that comes in life will be unforecasted by you at this stage in life. And every human being will make decisions that they go back to regret in hindsight. But when you have a partner who fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in you, then you can navigate those turbulent seas together. And if not, the rights of the world and 1,000 conditions and the contracts side of books will not protect you from the evil of this person or the evil of yourself. This is a very serious topic which we need to discuss. This is a very small introduction to a broader concept. I really encourage you to consider that book. It's a very healthy and thorough discussion, as well as case studies to see it in real life, inshallah.
What was the book called?
It's called Qawama, Qawamah, Family Leadership in Islam. Family Leadership in Islam by Dr. Bashir, B-E-S-H-I-R. Family Leadership in Islam by Bashir, B-E-S-H-I-R.
Our next question is, if only Muslims go to heaven, basically only Arabs and Desis, and a small minority of others. That means that only a small minority of others and Arabs and Desis go to heaven. That seems unfair just because they were not born into the religion. Is God just enough or merciful enough to accept them?
Yeah.
The Day of Judgment only makes sense in light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes, particularly the attribute of His attributes of power, His attribute of justice. When you understand the general concepts of Al-Quran Al-Kareem on how people will be brought to account, you will understand a general comfort with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is more just with ourselves than you and I, and the attributes by which a person is brought to account. If you try to apply it on John and Jenny and yourself, you will have a lot of turmoil in your mind. Because part of the reason that you can't hand out tickets to Jannah, nor can I, is because we have not yet secured our own spot. So a person on the Day of Judgment is brought to account comprehensively for their actions, their inner and outer state, their iman, and their good deeds with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And based on this are the consequences Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has assigned, positive and negative. Are we with each other? This accountability in its execution and broad concepts is clear to us. Iman is a conscious acceptance. Kufr is a conscious rejection after understanding. It is not just falling on the other side or being a quote non-Muslim. It is a conscious rejection. The likes of Abu Jahl, the likes of Abu Lahab, who knew it and said, no, my dollar is too important. My prestige is too important. I'm enjoying stepping on the neck of this person too much for it to be accountable before God. This type of evil. Now, are there potential fiqhi exceptions to this rule? There are. The ulama talk about Ahlul Fatra, the people of the period, literally the period between prophets, that may have lived at a time and place that did not have access to a prophet. Our times are very difficult and very uncertain because so many people only receive a doctored and ugly and manipulated picture of what Islam is, right? And just have so many barriers between understanding the message of the Prophet ﷺ because of all this nonsense that has been imported beforehand. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dealt with the people of between prophets justly, so our hope and our confidence in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is He will deal with us with more mercy than our own parents and our own selves with ourselves. Ali ibn Abi Talib was asked on the Day of Judgment if he would leave the judgment to his own parents or to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which would you choose? You chose Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a deep statement. If you say that statement with conviction, it's not light. To truly believe that Allah is more merciful with us than our own selves. Now the how this judgment is carried out is extraordinarily complex. I remember I have this face in my mind. You know how people get passionate about these fields and you're only like excited about it if you're in your field. So there was this brother that was like information science, and he came to me, he's like, Wallahi brother Muhammad Dani, the Day of Judgment, how does he keep all these records straight? It's amazing. And I was like, really? I've never thought about that. He's like, no, think about it. He's like, all of these records going and so on, nothing is lost. And even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows a person. And he was talking about it, and then he started going through all this jargon about what it takes to keep track of information for themselves. And I was like, this is amazing. And you know what I remembered, wallah, in the Quran? قَالَ تَعَالَى أَحْصَاهُ اللَّهُ وَنَسُوهُ. Allah kept it well guarded and they themselves forgot it. How much have we forgotten about our own record? And Allah has kept it, much less to understand the record of another person. Similarly, that's just keeping things straight. Now, being just, our legal systems struggle to be just to a person for something that happened in 5 seconds of their life. A 17-year-old who's grown up without a father, with nothing but drugs and destruction and evil around, really dhulma to this person from a young age, pulls out a knife and knifes somebody to death. American courts do not agree what is the just way to deal with this person. Is he tried as an adult or tried as a child? Is he liable for the death penalty or life in prison? Does he get leniency because that's the environment that he was in which he really couldn't escape? These are very complex questions about which American legal scholars disagree, much less international scholars, about what happens in 5 seconds of a person's life. I am not explaining away the question. I am not dodging the question. I know with absolute conviction, without a shadow of a doubt, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be more just with you and I than us or ourselves. It is possible that a woman walking with her modesty today would have the reward of 50 sahabiyat in the same way. Why? Because her context is more difficult. It's possible that a person grows up and they're struggling with a sickness that makes it hard to eat and drink, while others are enjoying life. They don't even think about that stuff. This person's patience with that illness before they pray 1 rak'ah might bring them to a heights of Jannah that we would only imagine. A person without language or without that background could be compensated for by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in ways that are absolutely just and utterly just. How is beyond you and I's comprehension, and if you want to prove me wrong, tell me how to judge that 17-year-old. Tell me why marriage age differs from state to state. Tell me why in certain contexts laws make sense overseas that don't make sense here, and vice versa. Tell me why fatwa vary for the same Imam Shafi'i, his fatwa in Iraq different from Egypt. And he's still the same scholar and he didn't cancel his old opinion, it changed with context. Tell me why Hitler died, and with the millions of lives lost, with all of this person never stood account in a court of human justice. The how, in the smallest senses, escapes our human capability and how. So this comes back to our iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He will be utterly just more just than all of us and more merciful than any of us with ourselves. And in this, we hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in our exceptional times, will compensate, as the Prophet ﷺ talks about holding on to deen like holding on with hot coals, that perhaps our struggle in these times where there are few people to support would be the times that the Prophet ﷺ indicated that a person would be rewarded like 50 Sahaba. Not like 50 of us, like 50 of the companions for the same deed. Maybe that will give us, inshallah, space in Jannah. And said similarly, the many people that are just getting doctored Islam, lies, fabrication, and it truly did not have an opportunity, the 50% of America that has not met a Muslim yet, I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you will be a part of changing those statistics and bringing the truth of these deen to people that are thirsty for it, and that those that have been affected by this time and between this message, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will deal with them in the most just and perfect manner. At the end, this is why in Islam we are really not judges. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the judge. There are concepts, we are true to the Quran, but we do not apply a judgment to an individual in this way, because the judgment is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
We have two more questions. The next one is, how does one balance fear and hope? I have been negatively motivated to do good deeds, but I would very much like to focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy and be motivated to please Him.
So I think this is honestly one of the most challenging questions that I've been having and experiencing with a lot of youth, young souls like yourselves, mashallah ta'ala, and I really could not agree more with the question. I think big part of this problem, and we have to realize again, not to blame, but this is a reality that we have to face. Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought two sides of it in order to balance all human beings to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with fear and with love. So fear is to really truly, with deep respect and love to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you have that consciousness of fearing, meaning that you do fear the fact that you don't want to go against Him, that you feel there will be consequences of the fact that you go against His wishes. But the problem with this, and the question pertains to that, is that the way we were brought up is that we were actually negatively addressed to view Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that if we go wrong, if we do a mistake, if we fall short, this is where we will be doomed. This is where hellfire would come. This is where the punishment, this is where, and unfortunately this is a really, really unfortunate way of upbringing that a lot of parents have used. But again, I want you to understand that our parents didn't know any better. This is the way that they were brought up. You don't wake up for Fajr prayer. They're very frustrated, and then they're gonna end up the very first thing that out of that negative attitude of being frustrated for the fact that you're not pushing yourself to wake up for Fajr, the very first thing comes to their mouth that, you know what, if you insistently don't wake up for Fajr, Allah will punish you in hellfire. You know, again, it's that frustration that you're not complying with their guidelines and rules. They end up focusing more on the fact of punishment, which brought the view opposite, completely opposite of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set the record straight with. So I want to just walk you through a true not interview, but rather discussion that I really had with some people. and that is with different segments and different ages, honestly. Somebody comes and exactly addresses the same questions. And I know that somebody has some issues, some problem, and he's very frustrated. Things are not working out in his life. So he comes out of frustration and he says, half of the Quran is all about punishment and hellfire and what have you. So I wanted to, exactly knowing the background, I told him, how did you come to this collection that half of the Quran is about this? He says, look, you read the stories of the nations or the stories of the past, anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is declaring punishment. I said, okay, perfect. Where does this actually apply to your question? That we cannot balance between the two. That it's heavily negatively that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is waiting or awaiting for anybody to do a mistake so he can be punished. So he says, the Quran is full of this. I said, just show me. I just want one example. I'm not asking for 10 examples or 100 examples, but rather one. Show me where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that someone is trying hard and striving hard to balance between fear and love, and then with one mistake, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to do that person in hellfire. And that person is doomed. Just show me that. All the ayat that you're talking about is ayat that explicitly talk about a nation, a previous nation, that has gone explicitly, awfully, obviously against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Did exactly like what Shaitan did to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He went against the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was not immediately doomed, but rather given an opportunity to come back. He was given a fair trial to come back, was questioned. A debate was happening between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Shaitan. Why did you do what you have done? And Shaitan insisted on standing his ground with the wrongdoing. And this is where the judgment came. So now the issue of balance. I want you to just think with me with all, now not only so now we come to one homework that I want you to look up in the Quran. Look up throughout all the ayat that talks about punishment and hellfire. If you can find one ayah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is threatening somebody who's trying hard to adhere to Allah's rules, but still falls short most of his time or her time. If you find me one ayah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is promising hellfire for that person, please bring it to me. Let's go now to the second legislative part of our Sharia and our faith. Let's go to the traditions and hadith and all the saying of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Where does it say in any hadith that someone is trying to balance between fear and love, but still they fall short with their shortcomings and weaknesses, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises to punish that person? Now, as you do your research, you will find the absolute opposite of that. I don't have really time to go through the depth of it, but I just want to throw your way a lot of examples that you have studied in Sunday school and some of the halaqat, you have heard the khatiras, whatever. How could it be ever possible for such a system of fear and love be balanced if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly said that this will never be balanced? I want you to actually emphasize more on the love part, and that's what the question actually said, that they want to focus more on positively thinking positive of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. This is what the hadith said, that on the day of judgment, and I just want you to just think with me for this explicit hadith. Prophet Muhammad said on the day of judgment, as people will be held for accountability, the rahmah of Allah, the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was split into two parts. 1 out of 100, 1% out of 100 will be what we are having now in our life on this earth. So all the mercy, all the love, all the compassion, all the kind-hearted people, all what you see around of people trying to be kind to each other, this is all because of the 1% that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed us to deal with each other on earth. 99% of the rest will be preserved until the day of judgment. To a point that Prophet ﷺ is continuing and saying in his hadith that as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala question people, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends accountability to people, people fearing that they're going to be doomed, and then the opposite would come of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowing them to go to heaven, allowing them to go to heaven, allowing them to go to heaven. Prophet ﷺ continues to say that it will be the dominant attitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send people to heaven, to a point that Shaitan himself, the one that received the curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when he did what he did, would come to actually reconsider the fact that there is a big possibility that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would forgive him himself. This is how love is outweigh way more of fear. But the problem is the application of it is wrong because of the way that we were brought up. Our parents focused more on negativity of, if you don't pray, you're going to be this. If you don't say Bismillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be upset with you. If you don't do that, then such and such would happen. If you don't, to a point, that you were actually brought up to feel that it's all mainly negativity, but this is not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presented. Shaitan would himself reconsider the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might forgive him. Stories that you have studied, again, so many that you have studied about a person that has done no right thing in their life, except with one act of good virtue, they were given and granted Jannah. But how would it be possible for that to happen if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually wanted a balance of 50-50 between fear and love? But this was never really asked or considered. But rather the fear is just one aspect of respect that you have. As you really truly respect somebody, and out of fear of that somebody, of the consequences, you would act accordingly. So inshallah ta'ala, in conclusion, I want you to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself set the record straight, that love is what you want to live, to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to see in you. And actually, Prophet ﷺ told us in an explicit hadith that he said, "Man ahabba liqa Allah, ahabba Allahu liqa'ah." Those who have the positive attitude of really knowing who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most forgiving. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not after his servants to do one mistake so they can be doomed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never created his people in order for them to be punished. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them every possible opportunities to be forgiven. Something just came to my mind, and I really just want to give you the glad tidings of this that actually happened to one of the greatest Sahaba. One day Prophet ﷺ was riding on his camel, and behind him was the great Sahabi Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiyallahu anhu arda. So out of no discussion, out of the blue, Prophet ﷺ would just surprise Mu'adh by telling him, Mu'adh, what's the rights of people upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the rights of people upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He said, Mu'adh, O Prophet of Allah, please tell me, I don't know. He said, the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon people is only one thing, that they would live without associating anything with him. Just don't love something more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Despite our shortcomings, do not set the record straight that you love something more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's associating something with Allah. And he kept telling, and he continued to tell him, and the rights of people upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if they would to do that, is to forgive them on the day of judgment. What happened to all the shortcomings? What happened to all our weaknesses? What happened to all our, mistakes? They're not even mentioned. So to a point that Sayyidina Mu'adh wanted to really confirm what he just heard. He said, "Ala ubashiru nasa ya Rasulullah." If that's the case, can't I just go and give the glad tidings to people? Because honestly, that fear is still there that, you know, we might fall short and then we die on that status and then we are going to face the consequences. Again, he had the issue of hellfire, and the issue of hellfire is something very sensitive. So Prophet ﷺ didn't tell him, no, you misunderstood me. He said, no, don't tell people. لا تبشرهم, and the answer is coming. فيتكلوا. He didn't tell him, don't go tell people because it's not what you thought. He told him, don't go tell them because it is so true that if they actually heard it, they are going to sit back and be too relaxed. And they would not actually, push themselves to act upon Allah's commands and what have you, because that's the human being's tendency. If you relax me too much, the obvious response is what I sit back. So he told them, don't tell them, not because it's not true. It is so true. It is so true. It is deeply true that if you actually tell them that is so simple to enter Jannah, then they will just sit back and become too relaxed. Which that he confirmed the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So by all means, live your life of having an absolute deep positive image of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, be very positive and be very deeply connected that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would forgive you. As Imam Abu Talib just mentioned, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves you more than you love yourself, how could you ever be wrong? So again, the fear is just a part for those that have actually insisted to go against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The verses of hellfire in the Quran are to address those that have gone through the path of the shaitan. The punishment issue has been set only for those that have consistently and insistently decided to continue their course of going against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is not in no way to address precious souls that are trying hard, striving hard to be good people, but with deficiencies, with shortcomings. It's not that at all, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to welcome those souls. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised, and His promise is the truth, that those struggling will be saved. And that's the end of it, inshaAllah ta'ala. So keep that positive attitude and always think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala positively. Jazakumullah khair.
Jazakumullah khairan, Shaykh Muhammad, and for all of you to share the space, alhamdulillah, this beautiful time. Appreciate your patience, alhamdulillah, and your steadfastness. This takes a lot of mental energy and a lot of courage, so I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this is a source of benefit and joy for all of us, inshallah. It's important to know that there are steps moving forward. Alhamdulillah, Allah granted us tawfiq to cover a lot of questions today. But first of all, we have to remember that this is one experience. This is not the only way we build our relationship with Allah. In fact, it's very important that we have the healthy spirituality and connection with Allah, as Shaykh Muhammad just closed with, because this is what builds knowledge of Allah. Worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes us to know Him more. Knowing Him more causes us to love Him more. Loving Him more causes us to worship even more. So always make sure that even as we're asking questions, we're investigating, that the practice of our deen is part of the sharpening of our mind and our drawing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's also several follow-up opportunities. A lot of you, alhamdulillah, attend the Saturday class, and we're welcome, and everyone here is welcome to join whenever they're able to, inshallah. We meet Saturday mornings, targeting all the community, but especially college and young professionals. This Friday, inshallah, in the evening after Salat al-Isha, which is 7:30, event is at 8, we're having an Imam's Town Hall on pressures facing the Muslim family. And inshallah, one of the khutbah this week will also be about that. So we're going to be asking, I don't mean this just in a marriage sense, even wherever you are in life, we're going to ask you, what are some of the top pressures facing you and or your family, both internal to the Muslim community and external to the Muslim community. We'll have some remarks, but most of this is going to be driven by you stepping forward with your ideas, brainstorming, talking with one another, and helping to shape the programs that we'll have to support you, inshallah, on this very important topic. So I encourage you to participate. Also, inshallah, today, like I said, we had a lot of tawfiq to be grateful for, but it's to be expected that there may be more questions. Today, I hope your mind feels a little fried like mine, but that's kind of because we're jumping from worship to spirituality to fiqh to day of judgment to this to that, and this is from the breadth of our deen. So if you have a question, you're like, I'm looking for a little bit more depth in that, inshallah we can support with that as best as we can. An area that you're really focused on your studies and you want a book recommendation or some help, inshallah, or just in general, your general commitment, alhamdulillah for what you've walked out of this space for, but what remains or what you want to explore forward, carry that energy forward, inshallah. Don't let any disappointment or any gap. This is not, wallahi, the end of all circles of knowledge in the world, right? This is a step along a longer journey, inshallah. And I know on behalf of Imam Muhammad and I, along with all of the other community support from wherever you may come from and the folks that may support you, alhamdulillah, we're all very willing to support you and help you in that journey, inshallah. So we'll close with dua. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. اللهم إنا نسألك الهدى والتقى والعفاف والغنى. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept for us. He is the most gracious, most merciful, and to grant us and accept our repentance, to forgive our shortcomings, to elevate us in dunya and akhirah, to increase us in knowledge, to bless our brotherhood and sisterhood, and to allow us, inshallah, to be seekers from the cradle of knowledge and benefit from the cradle to the grave. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this knowledge be a cause, inshallah, for those in this room and those who could not join us with their talents and abilities to be callers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's way in their families, in their circles, in their workplaces. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us firm hearts and steadfastness on the path. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for each person that is struggling with the struggles of dunya and the pulls of hardship and the traumatic experiences and the tests of dunya. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us and them firmness in this test and the highest levels of success, and that this test be a source of nearness to Him and a source of joy on the Day of Judgment. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have rahmah and compassion and mercy on all those that are suffering here and across the world, and to cause us to be from those that stand for justice and reform. Allahumma ameen, ameen. Subhanaka Allahumma hamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, wastaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'd like to thank, forgive me, I forgot to mention, I'd like to thank Brother Keshif, inshallah, and the team who put this together and for moderating. And a special thanks to Brother Faris Barakat and the team here at the Lighthouse for preparing this beautiful space for us. We really make a sincere dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this and all goodness that comes from the space be, inshallah, a light in the graves of Diya and Yusur and Razan and a source of joy for them, inshallah, as they have facilitated our gathering today.